Most of us believe that the walls of our homes are a fortress. We think that if we lock the deadbolt and turn off the lights, the world outside simply stops. But tonight, we're going to prove how wrong that assumption really is. In our first story, a routine evening in a quiet suburb turns into a predatory game of cat and mouse when a homeowner realizes the person they've been chatting with online isn't miles away, they're actually inside the house. Then, we venture into the deep woods of the Pacific Northwest, where a group of hikers finds a door standing alone in a clearing. A door that leads to a place where the laws of physics simply don't apply. And finally, our final boss story, a deep dive into the unsettling reality of the backrooms, where a construction worker discovers a yellow crawl space that wasn't on the blueprints and realizes that some exits are just traps in disguise. Buckle up. These are 3 stories from the darkest corners of the internet that will make you want to leave every light in the house on. It started with a simple notification. My name is Mark, and like most people living alone in their mid-20s, I spent way too much time on anonymous message boards. I'd been talking to a user named Blue-Eyed Girl for about 3 weeks. We shared the same taste in obscure horror movies and late-night snacks. One rainy Tuesday, she sent me a message that sent a small chill down my spine. It said, "I love the way your kitchen smells when you make coffee. Cinnamon is a bold choice." I froze. I was currently standing in my kitchen, a steaming mug of cinnamon-infused coffee in my hand. I lived in a rural part of Ohio. My nearest neighbor was a quarter-mile away. I looked out the window into the blackness of the woods, but saw nothing but my own reflection. I typed back, "Haha, very funny. You're stalking me now?" She replied instantly, "Not stalking, Mark. Observing. You should really fix that latch on the basement window. It rattles when the wind blows." I dropped the mug. It shattered against the tile with a sound like a gunshot. I didn't even clean it up. I grabbed a heavy iron skillet, the only weapon I had, and ran to the basement door. I locked it, my hands shaking so hard I could barely turn the key. The house was silent, save for the rhythmic thump-thump of my own heart. I sat on the sofa, eyes glued to the basement door. Then, my phone buzzed. A photo. It was a picture of the back of my head, taken from the top of the stairs, titled, "Gotcha." I didn't think. I sprinted out the front door, barefoot in the mud, and drove to a gas station 5 miles away to call the police. When they arrived and searched the house, they found something that still haunts my dreams. Beside the hole was a notebook. It contained a minute-by-minute log of my life for the last 20 days. The final entry, written in frantic, jagged print, read, "He's leaving. I'll have to find him again tomorrow." They never found her. But sometimes, when I make coffee in my new apartment, I swear I hear a faint, feminine giggle coming from the ceiling. Our second story comes from a veteran park ranger who spent 12 years patrolling the dense forests of the Appalachian Trail. He's seen bears, cougars, and plenty of lost hikers. But he's never been able to explain the echo. It was a humid July evening. "Help! Please, I'm over here." The voice sounded like a young girl, maybe 10 years old. It was coming from a deep ravine about 50 yards off the trail. Standard protocol. I radioed my position and started moving toward the sound. "I'm coming," I shouted. "Stay where you are. Stay where you are," the voice shouted back. I paused. The intonation was wrong. It wasn't an answer. It was a perfect carbon copy mimicry of my own voice, just in a higher pitch. I pushed forward, the brush tearing at my uniform. I reached the edge of the ravine and shone my high-powered flashlight down. There was no girl. There was something that looked like a deer, but its legs were too long, its joints bending in directions that should have snapped bone. It was standing on 2 legs, staring up at me with eyes that reflected my light like polished silver coins. It didn't have a mouth, not a real one, just a vertical slit that pulsed with every breath. I stood frozen as the creature opened that slit. My own voice came out of it, perfectly clear, perfectly calm. "I'm coming. Stay where you are." Then it began to climb. It didn't scramble like an animal, it moved with a jerky, stop-motion grace, its long fingers gripping the wet rock. I didn't wait. I turned and ran, my lungs burning, the sound of my own voice screaming for help echoing through the trees behind me. When I reached my truck, I looked back. The creature was standing at the tree line, perfectly still. It raised a hand and waved, exactly the way I wave to tourists. I quit the next day. People ask why I don't go hiking anymore. I just tell them that in those woods, the echoes don't just repeat what you say. They learn who you are. And now, for the final boss. This is the account of a man named David, a commercial electrician who took a job at a half-finished office complex. The building was a skeletal mess of steel and concrete. David was tasked with tracing a faulty wire through a service hum behind a drywall partition. He squeezed through a narrow gap, expecting to find the electrical main. Instead, he tripped and fell through what he described as a soft spot. In reality, he landed on a damp, carpeted floor. The smell hit him first, the cloying, sour stench of old, wet carpet. Then, the sound. A low, industrial hum of fluorescent lights that felt like a physical pressure against his skull. He was in a room with monochromatic yellow wallpaper. It stretched out in every direction, a non-Euclidean nightmare of randomly segmented rooms. He checked his phone. No signal. He checked his watch. The hands were spinning backward. David walked for what felt like hours. Every corner he turned led to another identical yellow hallway. He started marking the walls with a Sharpie, but when he turned back, the marks were gone. That's when the humming changed. It wasn't just the lights anymore. It was a breathing sound. Deep, wet, and rhythmic. David hid behind a partition as a shadow stretched across the yellow floor. It was spindly, easily 8 feet tall, with limbs like blackened wires. It didn't walk, it glided, making a sound like dry leaves skittering across pavement. David held his breath until his chest felt like it would explode. The creature stopped. It leaned its head toward his hiding spot. Then, the fluorescent lights above David flickered and died. In the sudden darkness, he felt a cold, slender finger brush against his forehead. He bolted. He ran until his legs gave out, finally stumbling into a wall that felt soft. He threw his weight against it and tumbled back out into the concrete service hum of the office complex. He was covered in a thick, yellow slime that smelled like ozone and rot. His foreman found him screaming, clutching his wire cutters. David hasn't spoken a word since. But the police report mentions one detail that the doctors can't explain. On David's back, burned into his skin, is a perfect map of a floor plan that doesn't exist in this world. A map where every hallway leads to a room labeled The End. We like to think we're safe. We like to think we know the world. But as Mark, the ranger, and David found out, the world is a lot thinner than we realize. Sometimes, the shadows don't just stay in the corner. Sometimes, they follow us home. Which of these stories left you the most unsettled? Was it the stalker in the attic, the mimic in the woods, or the yellow nightmare of the back rooms? Let me know in the comments below. And remember, lock your doors. You never know who or what is already inside. Good night.